The courtroom in Manhattan wasn't just silent. It was frozen in a state of collective shock. Everyone had come to watch Daniel Thorne, the arrogant tech mogul, destroy his quiet, penniless wife, Molly. He had live-streamed their breakup, mocked her poverty on social media, and dragged her into court to ensure she left with nothing but the clothes on her back. He thought he was the predator playing with his food. But the moment the heavy oak doors swung open and a man worth more than the entire GDP of a small country walked in, Daniel's smirk vanished. He didn't realize that the woman he was shaming wasn't a nobody. She was the only daughter of the most dangerous man on Wall Street, and Daddy was home. This is the story of how a bully found out that silence isn't weakness. It's a trap. The Honorable Judge Henry Patterson banged his gavel, the sharp sound cutting through the murmurs of the packed courtroom like a gunshot. Outside the Manhattan Supreme Court, the paparazzi were already swarming. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a public execution, and Daniel Thorne was the executioner. Daniel sat at the plaintiff's table, leaning back in his custom-tailored Italian suit, looking every bit the master of the universe he claimed to be. At 34, he was the face of Thorne Logistics, a shipping software company that had made him a millionaire. But money wasn't enough for Daniel. He needed adoration, and he needed dominance. He adjusted his silk tie and winked at the press gallery. He had ensured this trial was open to the public. He wanted the world to see him discard Molly. Opposite him sat Molly. She looked small in the oversized wooden chair. She wore a simple, slightly faded grey dress, the same one she had worn to their rehearsal dinner 3 years ago. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she stared at her hands, refusing to look at the cameras or the man who had promised to love her forever. "Mr. Sterling, you may proceed," Judge Patterson said, looking over his spectacles with a hint of distaste. Richard Sterling, Daniel's attorney, stood up. Sterling was known in New York legal circles as the Butcher. He didn't just win cases, he humiliated the opposition. "Thank you, Your Honor," Sterling said, his voice smooth and predatory. He walked toward the witness stand where Daniel was already seated. "Mr. Thorne, tell the court why we are here today." Daniel leaned into the microphone. "We're here because I made a mistake, Your Honor. A mistake named Molly." A ripple of laughter went through the gallery. Molly didn't flinch. "Could you elaborate?" Sterling asked. "I'm a successful man," Daniel said, expanding his chest. "I built my company from the ground up. When I met Molly, she was a waitress at a diner in Queens. I felt sorry for her. She had holes in her shoes. I thought I was rescuing a damsel in distress. I didn't realize I was inviting a parasite into my home." Objection. Molly's lawyer, a middle-aged woman named Evelyn Moore, stood up. She was known as a competent, low-cost attorney, the only kind Molly could afford. Counsel is characterizing the defendant not stating facts. "Sustained," the judge sighed. "Stick to the facts, Mr. Thorne." "The facts are simple," Daniel continued, unbothered. "She contributed nothing. Zero. I paid the mortgage, I paid for the cars, I paid for the food she ate. And how did she repay me? By refusing to attend my corporate events because she didn't fit in. By embarrassing me in front of investors with her lack of education. And finally, by stealing." Sterling held up a document. "Your Honor, we have submitted evidence, Exhibit C, showing a withdrawal of $5,000 from the joint account 2 days before Mr. Thorne filed for divorce. We believe she was hoarding cash to flee." The gallery whispered. $5,000 was pocket change to Daniel, but he was making it sound like the great train robbery. "I want a divorce," Daniel said, looking directly at Molly with cold, dead eyes. "And I want the prenup enforced strictly. She leaves with what she came in with. Nothing." Daniel's strategy was clear. He had already destroyed her reputation online. For weeks, he had been posting vague tweets about gold diggers and trust issues. He had turned their social circle against her. Friends they had made together now looked through Molly as if she were invisible. He wanted to break her spirit. He wanted her to beg. But as Daniel smirked at the jury, he missed a tiny detail. Molly wasn't trembling. She wasn't crying. Her finger was tracing a circle on the wooden table, a rhythmic, calming motion. She was waiting. The afternoon session was grueling. Sterling called character witnesses. Daniel's friends, who painted Molly as a sullen, ungrateful mood killer who spent her days watching TV while Daniel slaved away at the office. Then it was time for the cross-examination. Evelyn Moore stood up. She adjusted her glasses and walked toward Daniel. She didn't look like a high-powered attorney. She looked like a librarian. "Mr. Thorne," Evelyn began softly, "you speak frequently about your wealth. You are proud of your financial acumen, are you not? I know how to make money, yes." Daniel scoffed. "Unlike some people." "And you insisted on a prenuptial agreement." "Absolutely," Daniel said. "I'm not an idiot. I knew she brought nothing to the table. I wanted to protect my assets." "Let's look at that agreement. Clause 4, Section B." Evelyn read from a paper. It states, "In the event of a dissolution of marriage, each party shall retain sole ownership of all assets, debts, and liabilities acquired prior to the union, and any assets acquired during the union shall be divided based on the percentage of financial contribution to said asset." "That's right." Daniel grinned. "I paid for everything, so I keep everything. It's ironclad. My lawyers wrote it, and she signed it." "Did you force her to sign it?" "Force, no. I told her sign it or the wedding is off. She knew the deal. She wanted the meal ticket, so she signed." "So you are testifying under oath that you want this document enforced to the letter, strict adherence." 100%, Daniel said. "I want the letter of the law." Evelyn Moore paused. She looked at Molly, who finally looked up. For the first time in the trial, Molly smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a hunter who just heard the trap snap shut. "Very well," Evelyn said. "No further questions for this witness." Daniel stepped down, high-fiving his lawyer. He thought he had won. He thought the trial was practically over. He was already planning his victory party at Le Bernardin. "Does the defense have any witnesses?" Judge Patterson asked, checking his watch. He wanted to wrap this up. It was a clear-cut case of a rich man dumping a poor wife. Routine. Boring. Evelyn Moore stood tall. Her demeanor shifted instantly. The librarian vibe vanished, replaced by a steel-spined sharpness. "Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls its first and only witness, Mr. Silas Vance." The name hung in the air for a second, not registering with the general public in the gallery. But the judge froze. Daniel frowned. "Who? Silas Vance?" Evelyn repeated louder this time. Suddenly, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Two men in dark suits walked in, first private security, clearly former military. They scanned the room with professional paranoia. Then an older man entered. He was in his late 60s with silver hair and a face carved from granite. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that probably cost more than Daniel's car. He walked with a cane, not out of frailty, but as an accessory of power. The air in the room seemed to be sucked out. Daniel's lawyer, Sterling, went pale. He leaned over to Daniel, his whisper frantic. "Daniel, do you know who that is?" "No," Daniel whispered back, annoyed. "Some old relative of hers. Her dad is a mechanic in Ohio." "You idiot," Sterling hissed, sweat breaking out on his forehead. "That is Silas Vance, the CEO of Vance Global, the mining magnate. He owns half the shipping routes your logistics software uses. He's a billionaire, a real one." Daniel felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "So what is he doing here?" Silas Vance walked past the plaintiff's table. He didn't look at Daniel. He didn't acknowledge the judge yet. He walked straight to Molly. The woman Daniel had called trash, the woman he said had holes in her shoes, stood up. Silas stopped in front of her. The room was dead silent. "Hello, Daddy," Molly said softly. Silas reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His eyes, cold as ice, when looking at the room, melted into warmth for her. "I told you he wasn't worth the trouble, Elle," Silas said, his voice deep and gravelly. "But you always had to learn the hard way." "I know," Molly whispered. "Are you ready to end this?" Silas asked. "Yes." Silas turned slowly to face Daniel. The look he gave him was terrifying. It wasn't anger. It was total dismissive indifference. It was the way a boot looks at an ant. Silas walked to the witness stand and sat down. Judge Patterson cleared his throat. He looked flustered. "Mr. Vance, this is unexpected. You have been sworn in." "I know the procedure, Henry," Silas said, coolly, nodding to the judge. They moved in the same circles, the ultra-elite clubs of Manhattan, where Daniel Thorne would never be allowed past the lobby. Evelyn Moore approached the stand. "Mr. Vance, please state your relationship to the defendant." "Molly Vance is my daughter," Silas said. "My only child." The courtroom erupted. Reporters were typing furiously on their phones. The live stream chat, which had been mocking Molly moments ago, suddenly flooded with shock emojis. "Wait, isn't she Molly Smith Vance, like the Vance Tower in Chicago?" This guy just buried himself. Judge Patterson banged the gavel. "Order, order in this court." When the noise died down, Evelyn continued. "Mr. Vance, could you explain why your daughter has been living under the name Molly Smith, working as a waitress and married to Mr. Thorne without his knowledge of her background?" Silas folded his hands. "My daughter has always despised the weight of her inheritance. She wanted to be loved for who she was, not what she could buy. 5 years ago, she asked for a sabbatical from her life. She wanted to live normally. She took a minimum wage job. She lived in a studio apartment. She wanted to find a partner who loved her." Silas's eyes drifted to Daniel. "She thought she found that in Mr. Thorne. She told me she met a man who was ambitious, charming, and kind. She begged me not to interfere, not to run a background check, not to reveal myself. She wanted to tell him the truth on her own timeline." "And did she?" Evelyn asked. "She tried," Silas said. "About a year into the marriage, she called me crying. She said Daniel had changed, that the moment the ring was on her finger, the charm vanished. He became controlling. He belittled her poverty. He made her feel small to make himself feel big." Daniel gripped the table. His face was red. "This is irrelevant," he shouted. "Who cares who her dad is? She lied to me, that's fraud." "Sit down, Mr. Thorne," the judge barked. Mr. Vance, Evelyn continued, Mr. Thorne claims he supported your daughter entirely, that she brought 0 assets into the marriage. Silas let out a dry, dark chuckle. Is that so? Mr. Thorne has invoked the prenuptial agreement which states that assets acquired during the marriage are divided by contribution and assets brought into the marriage remain separate. Are you familiar with the assets Molly brought into the marriage? I am, Silas said. Could you list them? Silas reached into his inner suit pocket and pulled out a pair of reading glasses. He didn't need papers. He knew the numbers. When Molly turned 21, the Vance family trust matured, Silas stated calmly. She has full ownership of the Vance real estate portfolio, which includes 4 commercial skyscrapers in Midtown Manhattan. She holds a 15% controlling stake in Vance Global Industries. She also possesses a diversified portfolio of stocks and bonds managed by J.P. Morgan Private Client Services. And the value, Evelyn asked, the total valuation of assets legally under her name before the date of her marriage to Mr. Thorne is approximately $4.2 billion, Silas said. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Daniel Thorne's mouth fell open. He looked at Molly. She was just sitting there, smoothing her dress. 4.2 billion. Daniel was worth maybe 15 million on a good day. He was a minnow swimming next to a leviathan. So, Evelyn said, turning to face a sweating Daniel. When Mr. Thorne insisted on a prenup to protect his assets, he effectively waived any right to her billions. Correct, Silas said. He was very adamant about keeping finances separate. He didn't want her debt, so he gets none of her equity. Thank you, Mr. Vance, Evelyn said. But there is one more thing. Mr. Thorne claims he paid for everything during the marriage. The house, the cars, the lifestyle. Mr. Thorne lives in a penthouse at 432 Park Avenue, does he not? Silas asked. Yes, he does. And who owns the building? Silas asked. Evelyn smiled. Vance Real Estate Holdings. And did Mr. Thorne pay rent? He paid a maintenance fee, Silas said. But the deed. The mortgage, there isn't one. Molly owns the apartment. She let him live there. She directed the management company to list him as the tenant, so his ego wouldn't be bruised. But technically, he has been living in her house rent-free for 3 years. Daniel jumped up. That's a lie. My name is on the lease. A lease for $1 a year, Silas countered sharply. A lease that can be terminated with 30 days' notice, which I believe was issued this morning. Mr. Sterling. The judge looked at Daniel's lawyer. You might want to control your client. He is currently screaming at a man who could buy this courthouse and turn it into a parking lot. But Evelyn wasn't done. Your Honor, we are just getting started. Because while Mr. Thorne was busy protecting his millions from his wife, he forgot to protect himself from the law. She picked up a thick stack of files. We are countersuing Mr. Thorne, not for alimony, but for corporate embezzlement fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. And we have the receipts. Daniel looked at the door. For the first time in his life, he didn't want to be seen. He wanted to run. But the doors were blocked by Silas's security. The trap hadn't just snapped shut. It was starting to crush him. The courtroom atmosphere had shifted from a legal proceeding to a gladiatorial arena. Daniel Thorne, previously slouching with arrogant ease, was now sitting bolt upright, his face a mask of sheen and sweat. He looked like a man trying to hold on to water. Evelyn Moore placed the stack of files on the plaintiff's table right under Daniel's nose. The thud echoed like a coffin lid closing. Mr. Thorne. Evelyn began, her voice deceptively pleasant. You built Thorne Logistics on a series of high-value contracts, correct? Specifically, the North Star contract and the Blue Ocean shipping deal. Daniel cleared his throat, trying to regain his footing. Yes. I secured those deals through aggressive negotiation. My algorithm was superior. That's why they hired me. Your algorithm? Evelyn repeated, a dry smile playing on her lips. She turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Thorne's revolutionary algorithm was indeed functional, but it wasn't the reason he got the contracts. She turned back to Silas Vance, who was still on the stand looking down at Daniel with terrifying calm. Mr. Vance, Evelyn asked, who owns North Star Shipping? A holding company based in Delaware called Vance Maritime, Silas replied. And who owns Blue Ocean Logistics? A subsidiary of Vance Global Industries. A collective gasp ripped through the room. Even the court stenographer paused. So, Evelyn summarized, walking slowly toward Daniel. Mr. Thorne, the big breaks that made your career, the contracts that made you a millionaire, were quietly handed to you by your father-in-law. That's a lie, Daniel shouted, standing up. I pitched those deals I met with the CEOs. They loved my product. Silas leaned into the microphone, his voice dropping an octave. You met with actors, Daniel. Paid consultants I hired to sit in boardrooms and nod at your PowerPoints. I approved the contracts. I directed the funds. I wanted my daughter's husband to feel successful. I wanted you to be the man she thought you were. I subsidized your entire ego. Daniel froze. The color drained from his face so completely he looked gray. His entire identity, the self-made tech genius, the shark, was a fabrication. He was a charity case. But here is the problem, Mr. Thorne. Evelyn interjected, her tone sharpening into a blade. When Mr. Vance audited the accounts of North Star and Blue Ocean, last week he found discrepancies, significant ones. Evelyn flashed a document on the courtroom projector screens. It was a bank transfer record. This is a transfer of $250,000 from the corporate account to a shell company called Lux Consulting. Mr. Thorne, do you recognize this company? It's a vendor, Daniel stammered. Marketing. Consulting. Strange, Evelyn said. Because we had traced the registration of Lux Consulting, it's registered to a residential address in Soho, an apartment leased to a Miss Isabella Cortez. The name hung in the air. Daniel closed his eyes. Who is Isabella Cortez? Mr. Thorne, Evelyn pressed. Daniel stayed silent. Let me help you, Evelyn said. She is your personal assistant, and according to hotel manifests, flight logs to the Cayman Islands, and credit card statements, she is also your mistress. The gallery exploded. The judge banged his gavel furiously, but no one was listening. The cameras zoomed in on Molly. She sat perfectly still, her expression unreadable, like a queen watching a jester set himself on fire. You embezzled money, Evelyn thundered, her voice rising over the noise. You stole money from contracts given to you by your wife's father to fund a lavish lifestyle for your mistress, all while pleading poverty in this court to deny your wife a fair settlement. It wasn't stealing, Daniel yelled, desperate. It was my company's money. I can spend it how I want. Not when the contracts explicitly forbid commingling funds for personal use, Silas interjected. Clause 12. Breach of contract. And since you moved the money across state lines, that's wire fraud. That's federal, Daniel. Federal. The word bounced around Daniel's skull. We have alerted the Southern District of New York, Evelyn said calmly. But before the marshals get here, we have one more witness, because it seems Miss Cortez has realized that the credit cards have been declined. The defense calls Isabella Cortez. The doors opened, and a woman walked in. She was stunning, tall, with raven black hair, and wearing a red dress that was perhaps a bit too bold for court. But her face wasn't bold. It was furious. She walked past Daniel without looking at him. The air around her smelled of expensive perfume and burning bridges. Daniel reached out a hand. "Bella, don't touch me," she hissed loud enough for the microphone to catch. She took the stand. She didn't look scared. She looked like a woman who had been promised a yacht and ended up on a sinking dinghy. "Miss Cortez," Evelyn said, "thank you for coming on such short notice. What was the nature of your relationship with Mr. Thorne?" "He told me he was single," Isabella said, her voice clear. "He told me he had a roommate he was trying to evict, that she was a crazy stalker." Molly raised an eyebrow, but remained silent. "He told me he was a billionaire," Isabella continued, looking at her manicured nails. "He said he owned the shipping routes. He promised me a villa in Como. He promised me—" She hesitated, then reached into her purse. She pulled out a velvet box. "He gave me this. He proposed to me 3 weeks ago. He said as soon as the leech was gone, we would get married." Evelyn walked over and took the box. She opened it. Inside sat a massive canary-yellow diamond ring. It caught the courtroom lights, dazzling the onlookers. "A beautiful ring," Evelyn noted. "Did he tell you where he got it?" "He said he bought it at an auction. He said it cost $500,000. Evelyn turned to Silas Vance. "Mr. Vance, do you recognize this ring?" Silas nodded. "I do. That is the Sun of Andalusia. It belonged to my great-grandmother. It was part of the Vance family heirlooms. I gave it to Molly on her 18th birthday. It has been missing from her safe for 6 months." The courtroom audibly sucked in a breath. Daniel had not only cheated, he had stolen his wife's family heirloom to propose to his mistress. It was a level of disrespect that was almost impressive in its depravity. "Miss Cortez," Evelyn asked, "did you know this ring was stolen?" "No," Isabella shrieked, looking horrified. "I thought he bought it. I don't want stolen property. I'm not going to jail for this loser." "Loser?" Evelyn asked. "He's broke," Isabella shouted, pointing a finger at Daniel. "I tried to use the card he gave me this morning to buy a flight to Paris. Declined. I called the bank. They said the accounts are frozen. He's a fraud. He has nothing. He told me his wife was the poor one, but he's the one swimming in debt." Isabella looked at Molly. For a second, the two women locked eyes. The mistress and the wife. "You can have him," Isabella spat at Molly. "And you can have this cheap ring back." She tossed the box onto the clerk's desk. "Actually," Silas noted dryly, "that ring is insured for $1.2 million. It is certainly not cheap. But the man who gave it to you, yes, he is very cheap." Daniel stood up, his hands shaking. "Bella, baby, listen, it's a misunderstanding. Once the settlement comes through—" "There is no settlement, Daniel," Evelyn shouted, slamming her hand on the table. "There is only restitution." Isabella stormed off the stand, ignoring the bailiff's instructions. She walked past. Daniel paused, and then in a move that would be replayed on TikTok 1 billion times. Over the next 24 hours, she took her expensive, red-soled heel and stomped hard on Daniel's foot. He yelped in pain, hopping on one leg, looking ridiculous. The master of the universe was hopping around like a wounded flamingo. The judge didn't even bang the gavel. he was hiding a smile behind his hand. The atmosphere in the courtroom had curdled. It was no longer a place of civil arbitration. It was a crime scene where a man's soul had been stripped bare, examined, and found wanting. The echo of Isabella's heels, stomping on Daniel's foot, seemed to linger in the air, a phantom sound of disrespect that signaled the end of Daniel Thorne's reign. Judge Patterson sat high on his bench, his face a mask of exhaustion and distaste. He had presided over hundreds of high-net-worth divorces in Manhattan, seen titans of industry fight over summer homes and art collections, but he had never witnessed a self-immolation quite like this. He looked down at the defense table. Daniel Thorne was alone. Technically, his lawyer, Richard Sterling, was still standing next to him. But spiritually, Sterling was already 3 zip codes away. The high-powered attorney was furiously typing on his phone, his face pale. He was doing the mental calculus of how much this disaster was going to cost his firm's reputation. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Patterson said, his voice cutting through the murmur of the gallery like a cold wind. "We are at a crossroads. Your client has just been accused under oath with corroborating evidence of embezzlement fraud and grand larceny regarding a family heirloom. Do you have a redirect? Do you have any defense to offer before I make a ruling on the assets?" The courtroom held its breath. The cameras zoomed in on Sterling. Sterling looked at Daniel. He looked at the red-faced, sweating man who had lied to him for months, who had presented forged financial documents as fact, and who had just been humiliated by his own mistress. Sterling didn't reach for a file. He didn't reach for a microphone. He reached for the clasp of his briefcase. Click, click. The sound was deafening in the silence. "Your Honor." Sterling began, his voice devoid of its usual predatory smoothness. It was sharp, clipped, and professional. Pursuant to the New York Rules of Professional Conduct, specifically Rule 1.16, regarding the declining or terminating of representation, I am formally moving to withdraw as counsel for Mr. Thorne, effective immediately. Daniel's head snapped around, his eyes wide with panic. "Richard!" "What are you doing?" Sterling ignored him, addressing only the bench. "My client has used my services to perpetrate a crime and has insisted upon taking action that I consider repugnant and with which I have a fundamental disagreement. Furthermore, he has perjured himself in your courtroom, implicating me in the submission of falsified financial statements. I cannot in good conscience continue." "Granted," Judge Patterson said instantly. The gavel banged. "Mr. Sterling, you are excused. You can't leave me." Daniel lunged, grabbing the sleeve of Sterling's expensive suit. "I pay you, you work for me." Sterling ripped his arm away with a look of pure revulsion. "You owe me, Daniel." "There's a difference, and after what I just heard, you don't have enough money to pay me to stay." Sterling walked out. He didn't look back. He marched down the center aisle past the rows of stunned reporters, leaving Daniel standing solitary and small in the middle of the room. Daniel looked at the empty chair beside him. Then he looked at the gallery. The people he had invited, the influencers, the bloggers, his fans, were all filming him, but they weren't looking at him with admiration anymore. They were looking at him like a car crash. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, his tone shifting from judicial to pitying, "you are now representing yourself. Do you have anything to say regarding the distribution of marital assets?" Daniel gripped the table, his knuckles white. He was hyperventilating. This is a setup," he stammered, sweat dripping down his nose. "He's a billionaire." He pointed a shaking finger at Silas Vance. "He bought the witnesses. He bought the lawyer. This is a conspiracy." Silas Vance didn't even blink. He just adjusted his cufflinks, watching Daniel unravel. Suddenly, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open. They were thrown wide with authoritative force. The sound of heavy boots on the parquet floor echoed like thunder. Every head in the room turned. Entering the courtroom were 6 individuals. They didn't look like lawyers. They didn't look like court staff. They wore navy blue windbreakers with bold yellow lettering emblazoned on the back and chest FBI. Leading them was a woman who looked like she chewed glass for breakfast. She was tall, wearing a tactical vest over a crisp white shirt, her badge hanging from a chain around her neck. Her eyes scanned the room, locking onto Daniel like a targeting system. This was Special Agent Miller. In the world of white-collar crime, she was known as the Reaper. A collective gasp sucked the oxygen out of the room. The livestream chat, projected on a monitor in the press box, went vertical with speed. FBI. Is this real holiest? Agent Miller walked past the bar, ignoring the bailiff who stepped aside instinctively. She marched straight to the bench. Your Honor, she said, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority. Special Agent Miller, FBI Financial Crimes Division. I apologize for the interruption of these civil proceedings, but we have a warrant. Judge Patterson took the warrant she offered. He read it over his spectacles, his eyebrows climbing higher with every line. This is extensive, the judge murmured. We were prepared to wait until the conclusion of the trial. Agent Miller said, her voice loud enough for the microphone to catch. However, based on the testimony of Miss Cortez regarding the defendant's attempt to purchase a one-way ticket to Paris this morning, Daniel Thorne has been designated an immediate flight risk. We are executing the warrant now. Daniel backed away from the table, knocking over his water pitcher. It shattered the glass, sprawling across the floor like diamonds water soaking his Italian leather shoes. Flight risk, Daniel squeaked. I live here. I'm a CEO. Agent Miller turned to face him. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Daniel Thorne, you are under arrest. For what? Daniel screamed, his voice cracking into hysteria. I didn't do anything. Agent Miller began to recite the list, and it hit the room like a series of physical blows. You are charged with 3 counts of wire fraud under Title 18 United States Code Section. You are charged with securities fraud for the falsification of Thorne Logistics revenue streams. You are charged with interstate transportation of stolen property regarding the Son of Andalusia diamond, and thanks to the forensic audit provided by Vance Global this morning, you are charged with aggravated identity theft for opening lines of credit in your wife's name without her consent. The silence that followed was absolute. Daniel looked at the exit. 2 agents were blocking it. He looked at the judge. Patterson was purposefully looking away. He looked at the only person left. Molly. Daniel stumbled toward the plaintiff's table, his hands out, pleading. The agents moved to intercept him, but Molly raised a hand. Wait, she said softly. The agents paused. The room watched. Molly stood up. She smoothed the front of her simple grey dress. She walked around the table, moving into the open space between the lawyers' benches. She stopped 3 feet from Daniel. He looked pathetic. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrifying realization of a caged animal. Molly, baby, please. Daniel wept, tears streaming freely now, mixing with the snot running from his nose. You can't let them take me. Federal prison. I won't survive there. I'm your husband. We took vows. For better or worse, right? This is just the worse part. We can fix this. He reached out to touch her, but he stopped, sensing the invisible wall of ice around her. "Tell your dad to call it off," Daniel whispered frantically. "He can make a call. I know he can. I'll sign anything. I'll sign the divorce papers. I'll give you the company. Just don't let them put me in cuffs." Molly looked at him. Really looked at him. For 3 years she had looked at him with love, then with confusion, then with fear. Now she looked at him with the clarity of a microscope. "You can't give me the company, Daniel," she said, her voice low but steady, picked up perfectly by the court microphones. "You don't own it. You never did. It was built on my father's contracts, funded by my father's money, and run on an algorithm you stole from a developer in Bangalore." Daniel flinched as if she'd slapped him. I loved you, Molly. In the beginning. I really did." "No." Molly shook her head slowly. "You loved that I was small. You loved that I was poor. You loved having someone to look down on because it was the only way you could feel tall. You didn't marry a partner, Daniel. You married an audience." She reached into her small, worn purse. Her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finality. She pulled out a small, crumpled slip of thermal paper. It was yellowed with age. She stepped forward and tucked it into the breast pocket of his suit jacket, right over his pounding heart. What is this?" Daniel stammered. "The receipt," Molly said. "From the diner in Queens, our first date. You paid for 2 coffees and a slice of pie, $6.50. She stepped back, her eyes hard as diamonds. "You spent 3 years reminding me that you saved me from that life. You threw every dollar you spent in my face. So I'm returning the favor." Molly leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that echoed like a shout in the silent room. "I'm keeping the billions, Daniel. I'm keeping the real estate. I'm keeping the name. But that receipt, that's yours. You're leaving this marriage exactly how you wanted me to leave it." "Molly, no. With nothing," she finished. She turned her back on him. "Agent Miller, he's all yours." "No, Molly!" Daniel screamed a primal sound of terror. The agents swarmed him. There was no dignity in it. They spun him around, slamming him chest first against the defense table. Daniel kicked and thrashed, knocking his chair to the floor with a loud clatter. "I'm a victim here," Daniel shrieked as the metal cuffs ratcheted tight around his wrists. Click, click, click. "She tricked me. It's fraud." She pretended to be poor. "That's entrapment." Agent Miller grabbed him by the back of his collar and his cuffed arm. "You have the right to remain silent, Mr. Thorne," she said, dryly, hauling him upright. "I suggest you start using it." The walk of shame was brutal. The paparazzi in the front row didn't just take photos. They stood up to get better angles. The flashes were a strobe light of humiliation, illuminating Daniel's tear-streaked face, his disheveled suit, and the sheer terror in his eyes. "Daddy, help me!" Daniel screamed at Silas as they dragged him past the witness stand. Silas Vance didn't look at Daniel. He was busy inspecting the handle of his cane as if checking for a scratch. The ultimate insult. He didn't even deem Daniel worthy of a glare. The agents hauled him through the center aisle. The doors swung open, and the noise from the hallway, the swarm of press outside who couldn't get in, roared like a beast. "Malia!" The wail faded as the heavy oak doors swung shut, sealing the courtroom. Silence rushed back into the room, heavy and profound. Molly stood in the center of the floor, her back to the door. Her shoulders were rigid. She took a breath. A shudder went through her, the physical release of 3 years of holding up a crumbling sky. Silas Vance stood up. Despite his age and his cane, he moved with surprising speed. He walked down from the stand and approached his daughter. He didn't say a word. He simply opened his arms. Molly stepped into them, burying her face in her father's shoulder. She didn't cry. She was done crying over Daniel Thorne. She just breathed. "It's over, Elle," Silas whispered into her hair. "The trash has been taken out." Molly pulled back. She wiped her eyes not to clear tears, but to clear her vision. She looked at the judge. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I apologize for the disruption." Judge Patterson looked at the woman standing before him. He had seen her walk in hours ago looking like a victim. She now looked like a titan. "No apology necessary, Mrs. Vance," the judge said, using her maiden name with deliberate respect. "In fact, I believe that was the most productive use of this court's time in 20 years. He picked up his gavel, twirling it in his fingers. "Now," the judge said, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes, "the defendant has been arrested, his counsel has fled, and his assets are frozen by the federal government. I believe we have a divorce to finalize. Shall we proceed with the summary judgment?" Molly nodded, taking her seat next to Evelyn Moore. She sat tall. The chair didn't swallow her anymore. "Yes, Your Honor," Molly said. "Let's finish it." The heavy oak doors had swallowed Daniel's screams, leaving the courtroom in a silence that felt vibrating and electric. But while the criminal drama had concluded with the click of handcuffs, the civil execution was just beginning. The machinery of the law does not stop for tears, and it certainly does not stop for federal arrests. Judge Patterson, having regained his composure after the spectacle of the FBI raid, adjusted his spectacles. He looked down at the defense table. It was a desolate landscape, an overturned chair, a puddle of spilled water, and a few legal pads fluttering in the draft from the air conditioning. "Let the record show," the judge intoned, his voice scratching across the silence, "that the plaintiff Daniel Thorne is no longer present due to involuntary federal detainment. His counsel has withdrawn. The court will proceed ex parte." Evelyn Moore, Molly's attorney, stood up. She didn't look tired. She looked like a surgeon ready to close the patient. She approached the bench with a new stack of documents. "Your Honor," Evelyn said, her voice crisp, "we move for immediate summary judgment on the divorce decree. Given Mr. Thorne's incarceration and the overwhelming evidence of financial fraud presented today, we ask that the prenuptial agreement be enforced strictly as was Mr. Thorne's original emphatic request." "The court agrees," Judge Patterson said, writing furiously on his docket. "The prenuptial agreement is upheld. All assets brought into the marriage by Ms. Vance remain her sole property. All debts incurred by Mr. Thorne remain his sole liability." Evelyn paused, glancing at Silas Vance, who gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. "There is the matter of the marital assets, Your Honor," Evelyn continued, "specifically the company known as Thorne Logistics." The judge frowned, looking at the forensic accounting file. "Ms. Moore, according to the federal warrant we just heard, Thorne Logistics is effectively a hollow shell. Its revenue was falsified, its contracts are void due to fraud, and it currently carries a debt load of nearly $4 million to various creditors, including the insurance payout for the stolen diamond ring." "Correct," Evelyn said. "The company is insolvent. If it goes into bankruptcy, the 200 employees, developers, support, staff, janitors will lose their jobs immediately. They will lose their pensions. They will be collateral damage in Daniel's war of ego." Molly stood up. She walked to the railing. "Your Honor, I don't want that," she said. "Those people worked hard. They believed in the lie just as much as I did." "What are you proposing, Mrs. Vance?" the judge asked. "A hostile acquisition," Evelyn answered. "Ms. Vance is offering to purchase 100% of the equity in Thorn Logistics, along with its intellectual property and its liabilities. She will assume the $4 million in debt, personally preventing the company from collapsing." The judge blinked. "She wants to buy a sinking ship. Why?" "To patch the holes and sail it under a new flag," Molly said firmly. "But since the company has a negative valuation and the owner is currently being processed at Federal Holding, the offer price reflects the current market value of Daniel Thorne's legacy." "And what is that offer?" Molly placed a single crisp bill on the wooden railing. $1, she said. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. $1. It was the ultimate dismissal. It wasn't a purchase. It was a statement. Daniel had spent his life chasing billions, and in the end, his life's work was being sold for less than the price of the coffee he bought on their first date. The judge looked at the dollar. A slow smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a man who appreciated poetic justice. "The court accepts the valuation," Judge Patterson ruled, banging the gavel one final time. "Thorn Logistics is sold to Molly Vance for the sum of $1. The divorce is final. Case closed." 3 months later. The concrete tomb. The Metropolitan Correctional Center, MCC, in Lower Manhattan is a fortress of misery. It smells of industrial disinfectant, stale bologna, and human sweat. It is a place designed to strip a man of his humanity layer by layer. Molly sat in the visitor's booth on the 9th floor. She was no longer wearing the faded grey dress. She wore a tailored white suit that screamed authority. Armani sharp lines, pristine fabric. Her hair was loose, a cascade of waves. She sat with her legs crossed, checking the time on a Patek Philippe watch. On the other side of the reinforced plexiglass, a door buzzed. Daniel Thorne walked in. Or rather, the shell of Daniel Thorne walked in. He had lost 20 pounds. His bespoke Italian suits were replaced by a bright orange jumpsuit that hung off his gaunt frame like a sack. His hair, once gelled to perfection, was shaved close to the scalp, revealing the uneven shape of his skull. He had a patchy beard, grey hairs sprouting prematurely from the stress. He shuffled to the stool and sat down. He picked up the black phone receiver with trembling hands. He looked at Molly, and for a moment he didn't seem to recognize her. She was glowing. He was rotting. "You came," Daniel rasped. His voice was scratchy, unused to normal volume after weeks of whispering in a cell to avoid angering the gangs. "I did," Molly said calmly into her receiver. Her voice was clear, unaffected by the static of the line. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes desperate and watery. "Molly, God, you look beautiful. You look like an angel." "Save the compliments, Daniel. The meter is running." "Molly, you have to get me out of here." Daniel began the words, tumbling out in a panic. "It's hell. You don't understand. The things I've seen. I can't sleep. They scream all night. The food. I'm starving, Elle. I'm starving." He pressed his hand against the glass. "I know you're still angry. I get it. I was a jerk. I was stressed with the business. But 10 years. The lawyer said the feds are asking for 10 years. You can't let them do that to your husband." Molly watched him beg. She remembered the time she had begged him for money to buy a winter coat, and he told her to budget better. She remembered begging him to come to her grandmother's funeral, and he said he had a golf game. "I'm not your husband, Daniel," she said coldly. The divorce was finalized 90 days ago. "It's a piece of paper," Daniel hissed. "We had a life. I built that company for us, for our future." Molly laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, but it was devoid of humor. "You built nothing. You stole. You lied. And speaking of the company," she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a glossy magazine. It was the latest issue of Forbes. On the cover was Molly looking powerful and serene. The headline read, "From Ashes to Empire. The Rise of Phoenix Systems." She held it up to the glass. "Thorn Logistics doesn't exist anymore," she said. "I bought it. For $1. Daniel's eyes widened, his jaw dropping. You bought my company. I bought my father's assets back," she corrected. "I fired your entire executive team, all the yes men who helped you cook the books. But I kept the engineers. I kept the support staff. We rebranded. It's called Phoenix Systems now. We just landed a government defense contract worth $300 million. "That's my code," Daniel screamed, slamming the receiver against the glass. "That's my genius. It was never your genius, Daniel. It was the team you ignored. I listened to them. I gave them equity. They fixed your buggy code in a week." Daniel slumped back, defeated. The realization hit him harder than the prison sentence. He hadn't just lost his freedom. He had been erased. His name was gone from the building. His legacy was scrubbed clean. "Why did you come here?" Daniel whispered, tears leaking from his eyes. "To gloat. To kick me while I'm down." "No," Molly said. She leaned in close to the glass. "I came to say thank you." Daniel blinked, confused. "Thank you." "Yes. Thank you." Molly's eyes softened, not with pity, but with a strange kind of gratitude. "For 3 years I played small. I hid my background, my money, my power, because I wanted to be loved for me. I thought being weak made me lovable." She paused, looking at the broken man before her. "You taught me that silence isn't a virtue, Daniel. It's a vulnerability. You pushed me so far into the corner that I had to remember who I was. I had to remember that I am a Vance. I had to remember that I am a lioness. Molly, please. So thank you." She finished, standing up and smoothing her suit. "Your cruelty was the catalyst I needed. You didn't break me, Daniel. You built me. Don't leave me." Daniel stood up, the chain of his handcuffs rattling against the metal table. "I have no money. Sterling sued me. The IRS took everything I can't afford. Commissary Molly, send me money. Just a few thousand. Please." Molly looked at him one last time. She saw the greed that still lived in his eyes, even in prison. He didn't want her love. He wanted her wallet. He hadn't changed. He never would. "You said you wanted me to leave with what I came in with." Molly said, her hand on the door handle. "I came in with my dignity. I'm leaving with it." "And what about me?" Daniel screamed. "What do I have?" Molly smiled. "You have the receipt, Daniel, from the diner. I hope it keeps you warm." She hung up the phone. She walked out of the booth. She didn't look back at the man banging his fists against the shatterproof glass, mouthing her name in a silent scream that no one would ever hear again. Molly walked out of the MCC detention center and into the bright, crisp sunlight of a New York autumn. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. A black town car was idling at the curb. The rear window rolled down, revealing Silas Vance. He looked at his daughter, not the timid girl who had run away to Queens to be a waitress, but the woman who had just stared down a monster and won. The driver opened the door for her. "How was he?" Silas asked as she slid onto the leather seat. "Bankrupt," Molly said, "in every sense of the word." "Good." Silas nodded. "I spoke to the warden. He's been assigned to laundry duty. 6 cents an hour. It will take him roughly 400 years to pay back what he owes." Molly chuckled. She looked out the window as the car pulled away, merging into the chaotic, beautiful traffic of the city. She saw the skyline, the steel and glass towers reaching for the clouds. One of those towers belonged to her now. Not because her father gave it to her, but because she had taken command of it. "Where to, boss?" the driver asked, looking at her in the rear-view mirror. Molly checked her phone. She had a board meeting at 2:00 p.m., a charity gala at 7:00 p.m., and a life to live in between. "Take us to the office," Molly said. "We have an empire to run." As the car sped off, leaving the gloomy prison fortress behind, Molly Vance didn't just feel rich. For the first time in her life, she felt free. And that is how Daniel Thorne learned the most expensive lesson of his life. Never mistake silence for weakness, and never judge a book by its cover, especially when that book is backed by a billion-dollar library. He wanted to shame his wife publicly, but he ended up exposing his own fraud to the world. It's a brutal reminder that in the court of law and the court of karma, the truth always has a way of coming out. Daniel thought he was the main character, but he was just the villain in Molly's origin story. If you enjoyed this story of massive karma and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this with a friend who loves a good revenge drama, and subscribe with notifications on, so you never miss the next story. Let me know in the comments. Do you think Daniel deserved 10 years, or was losing his company enough punishment? I'll see you in the next video. The real heiress crashes. The Billionaire's Gala. Welcome back to Narratives and Memories. If you believe in reclaiming your power, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We are about to witness the most spectacular act of revenge ever stitched into a dress. The ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel was ablaze with light from baccarat crystals, reflecting the glow of hundreds of candles. That evening in Manhattan, the annual charity gala was a spectacle of the American elite, displaying their fortunes and their secrets. Amidst the flow of vintage champagne and calculated laughter, Marcus Thorne circulated the room, his hand possessively placed on the waist of a striking blonde. "Meet my wife," he announced, smiling widely at investors, socialites, and reporters. The woman, Alexis Cross, beamed, adorned in borrowed jewels and a surname that had never been hers. But just beyond the massive oak doors, someone was waiting. Elara Beaumont adjusted the gown she had stitched with her own hands during 6 months of strategic silence. Every stitch was a memory, every detail a declaration. It wasn't merely fabric, it was a manifesto. The doors swung open, and the click of her heels on the marble floor echoed like a sentence being passed. 300 pairs of eyes turned instantly. Silence sliced through the ballroom like a blade. Marcus froze, his champagne glass trembling in his hand. The blonde beside him visibly paled, because there, gliding across the velvet carpet like a Greek goddess reborn from the ashes, was the true Mrs. Thorne. And she hadn't come to ask questions. She had come to collect. Elara Beaumont first met Marcus Thorne on a rainy autumn evening in Brooklyn, when she still believed that love was built with small gestures, and honest words. She was 23, a budding designer working 16 hours a day in a tiny studio on Court Street, in the heart of Carroll Gardens, The space was the size of a generous closet, barely fitting a cutting table, 3 battered mannequins, and rolls of fabric bought with the last of the savings her grandmother, Maeve, had left her. Marcus was 10 years her senior, the owner of a luxury hotel chain across the globe, and possessed a manufactured charm that Alara, at the time, mistook for natural sophistication. He stumbled into the studio one gloomy November afternoon, looking for a unique gift for his mother's 70th birthday. The bell above the door jingled, and Alara looked up from the hem she was stitching to see a tall man in an impeccable Tom Ford suit, rain still glistening on his wool coat. "Apologies for the intrusion," he said, his voice deep and cultured. "I'm looking for something special, something that isn't common." Alara stood, wiping her hands on her paint-stained apron. "Everything here is special," she replied with a shy smile. "And nothing is common." He chuckled, a genuine laugh that lit up his gray eyes. For the next hour, they talked about tailoring, the lost art of manual design, the authentic New York she loved, and the polished version he merely inhabited. Marcus chose a silk shawl Alara had hand-embroidered with patterns inspired by the Brooklyn Bridge. "It's perfect," he said. And then, almost as an afterthought, "Will you have dinner with me tomorrow?" 3 weeks later, they were dining in intimate restaurants where Marcus knew the chefs by name. He spoke of business expansion, the complexity of managing properties in 5 countries, and the loneliness that came with success. Alara shared her dreams of one day dressing powerful women and how every garment tells a story, a belief instilled by her grandmother that beauty without purpose is just empty decoration. Marcus listened, or seemed to, with an attention Alara had never experienced. She felt seen, valued, special. 2 months later, on a rented sailboat near the Statue of Liberty, with the Manhattan skyline illuminated behind them, he knelt and opened a velvet box containing a Cartier diamond ring. "Marry me," he said without flourish, like closing an important but inevitable deal. Alara said yes, believing, desperately and naively, that this was the start of a shared life, not the prologue to a monumental betrayal. The first years were good, or at least they appeared so, through the rose-tinted lenses Alara insisted on wearing. With Marcus's initial investment, she expanded her studio into a larger space, quickly earning a reputation for authenticity among clients who sought style over status. Meanwhile, Marcus's hotel empire expanded, accompanied by constant travel. Berlin, Prague, Lisbon, Vienna, Amsterdam, always a crucial meeting or delicate negotiation. Alara accepted the absences as the price of loving an ambitious man. She trusted him. When he sent goodnight texts from distant hotel rooms, she replied with photos of her work in progress, the life they were building together. She trusted the expensive gifts. She trusted foolishly that confidence was the unshakable foundation of marriage. But there were small, easy-to-ignore signs. Trips that extended without warning. Calls he took in another room, his voice low and tense. The time she called the hotel where he was supposedly staying, only to find no reservation in his name. "Must be a system error," Marcus would say, annoyed. Alara swallowed her doubt like a bitter pill, hoping it would pass quickly. Until the afternoon, everything changed. It was a typical New York Thursday. Alara was at the studio, adjusting the hem of a cocktail dress, when the bell jingled. A platinum blonde woman stood in the doorway, tall, with the kind of manufactured beauty that screamed money spent on Swiss clinics and exclusive gyms. She wore a Max Mara coat and carried a Hermès bag that cost more than 6 months of the studio's rent. "Hello," the woman said, entering uninvited. "I hear you do custom dresses." Alara, always professional, smiled. "Yes, it's my specialty. How can I help you?" The woman sat, crossing her legs, and idly flipped through a fashion magazine. "I need a wedding dress." "Wonderful. When is the wedding, and what style are you imagining?" The woman let out a high, uncomfortable laugh. "Actually, I'm already married. But my husband, he likes me to dress as a bride sometimes, to keep things interesting. We're a different kind of couple, you know." Ilara forced a polite smile and began taking measurements, trying not to judge. As she worked, the woman talked about her honeymoon in Santorini, her newly decorated apartment in the Upper East Side, and how her husband was generous, always surprising her with expensive gifts. "He has impeccable taste," the blonde continued, admiring her nails. "He gave me this necklace the other day." She touched a gold and diamond piece at her throat. "It's vintage, from a jeweler in the Diamond District." Ilara froze. She knew that necklace. She had seen it before, in Marcus's safe. He had told her it belonged to his grandmother and would be hers one day. Her heart began to race, but she kept her voice level. "It is beautiful. Your husband does have excellent taste." The woman continued chattering, oblivious to the storm gathering inside Ilara. Then, distractedly, she let it slip. "Marcus is so generous. He really knows how to treat a woman." Ilara's world slowed down. "Marcus," she repeated, her voice sounding alien. The woman looked up, and a flash of panic crossed her face. "Marcus Thorne," she confirmed, her voice now hesitant. "But you don't know him, do you?" The words left Ilara's mouth before she could stop them. "I am Ilara Thorne, his wife." The silence that followed was absolute. The blonde visibly paled. I didn't know. He said he was divorced." She stood up abruptly, knocking the magazine to the floor. "I have to go." She rushed out, leaving behind only a trail of expensive perfume and an emotional bomb that would explode slowly, devastatingly, in Ilara's chest. Ilara sank to the floor, surrounded by scissors and threads, but she didn't cry. Not yet. First, she needed to understand. She called the Thorne Hotel in Vienna, where Marcus was supposedly staying. "I'm sorry, madam, but we have no one registered under that name." "Ah, wait. Monsieur Thorne. He is not staying here, madam, but I can take a message?" Ilara hung up, the nausea rising. Where was Marcus? If not in Vienna, where had he spent the last 3 nights? The answer was obvious, sickening. He was with her, with the blonde, Alexis, the woman wearing Ilara's necklace, sleeping in the apartment Marcus had bought with their money, their future. That night, Marcus returned home, tired, loosening his tie, complaining about exhausting meetings. "Who is she?" Ilara asked from the dimly lit living room, her voice frighteningly calm. Marcus froze. "Who is who?" His voice was too controlled, too practiced. "The blonde, Alexis. The one you take to Santorini. The one you make wear wedding dresses. The one wearing my grandmother's necklace." Marcus briefly closed his eyes, a non-verbal confession. When he opened them, there was resignation, not denial. "Ilara, it's complicated. In the business world, image is everything. Investors, they want to see a certain kind of woman by my side, someone who fits in. And I don't fit in," Ilara finished, her voice cold. "I'm too simple, too focused on my work. My hands have calluses from needles, so they're unsuitable for corporate cocktail parties." He didn't answer. The silence was more eloquent than any word. Ilara stood up, feeling something inside her shatter irrevocably. Not her heart, but something deeper. Her trust, her faith, the naive version of herself that believed love was enough. "Sleep in the guest room," she said icily. "We'll decide what to do tomorrow." But Ilara already knew what she would do. She just hadn't acquired the tools to execute it yet. In the weeks that followed, Ilara Moreau made an unexpected choice. She stayed, not out of weakness, but out of pure, calculated strategy. She learned during those days of acute pain that rushed revenge is wasted revenge. She watched. She noted. She investigated. She hired a discreet private investigator, Mike Chen, who quickly delivered a complete dossier. The apartment bought through a shell company in the Caymans, bank accounts showing monthly transfers to Alexis, receipts for jewels, boutiques, and spas. Marcus was funding an entire parallel life, but the worst discovery was the news articles. The Thorn couple opens new hotel in Berlin. Marcus and Alexis Thorn celebrate Amsterdam expansion. The elegant Mrs. Thorn at the charity gala. Alexis, wearing Ilara's surname, had been introduced to politicians, investors, and magnates, smiling and pretending to be the wife of a man who had a real wife at home, sewing dresses and waiting for scraps of attention. Ilara knew she couldn't confront him publicly yet. She wouldn't make a scene he could control. She would use the only weapon she commanded with absolute perfection. She returned to the studio and locked the door. For the next 6 months, she worked on a dress. Not just any dress. A masterpiece of emotional engineering. A wearable piece of art that would communicate everything words could not. She sold some of the jewelry Marcus had given her, transforming his gifts into the material for her liberation. She found the finest silk suppliers in France, imported lace from Belgium, and worked tirelessly. She had secretly embroidered small, invisible details into the inner hem of the dress. June 3rd, 2018, their wedding day. March 12th, 2024, the day she discovered the betrayal. October 15th, 2025, the day she would set herself free. They were secret talismans, reminders that she had survived. When the dress was finally complete in mid-September, Ilara received the gilded invitation. Charity Gala at the St. Regis Hotel. Date, October 15th. The final line on the back. Presence confirmed. Mr. Marcus Thorn and Mrs. Alexis Thorn. Mrs. Alexis Thorn. The name that was hers, now used by another woman on official. Elegant stationery. The final blow. But ghosts, Ilara learned in those dark months, can haunt. And she planned to do exactly that. She hired attorney Eleanor Vance, known for dismantling powerful men in high-profile divorces, and compiled all the necessary documentation. Legally, she was entitled to half of everything Marcus had built during their marriage. But Ilara didn't want money. She wanted something far more valuable. Dignity. The morning of October 15th dawned with an impossibly blue sky over Manhattan. Ilara woke at 5, every cell alert. Today was about execution. Her assistant, Margot, arrived with a military-like determination. They didn't speak much. Margot knew the whole story. She was a confidant and a sister in arms. At 6, Margot brought the dress. Ilara slowly removed the protective cover. The silk glowed in the late afternoon light. It was perfect. A physical manifestation of 6 months of pain transformed into art, humiliation transmuted into power. It was fluid yet structured, feminine yet fierce, elegant yet impossible to ignore. Ilara wore only the pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother, Maeve, the only jewels with immutable, emotional value. She had chosen strength, not ornamentation. At 7:00 p.m., she was in a discreet Uber, not Marcus's driver. She didn't want anything from him, not even transport. The car stopped in front of the St. Regis. The doorman, Christophe, recognized her. "Madame Thorn," he said, bowing with genuine respect. Ilara smiled. "Thank you for remembering, Christophe." She walked toward the open double doors, drawing a deep breath, feeling the embroidered dates on the hem graze her leg. A reminder of why she was here. And then she walked in. The click of her heels on the marble floor was deafening. 300 heads turned. Conversations died in the air. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. Ilara walked with the confidence of a queen entering her own kingdom. She saw him instantly. Marcus Thorne, in his perfectly cut tuxedo, his hand firmly on the waist of Alexis, who was wearing a sequined dress and Ilara's jewels. Their eyes met. Marcus froze. His smile died. His champagne glass trembled visibly, and Ilara, for the first time in months, felt power. Not power over him, but power over herself. The power to choose how her story would be told. Alexis followed Marcuse's gaze and instantly paled. She knew. Ilara stopped a meter away. She looked at Alexis. "You are wearing my jewelry," Ilara said calmly, her voice audible to the surrounding circle. It was a statement of fact. Alexis opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Then, Ilara turned to Marcus. "Introduce me," she commanded. Marcus swallowed hard. "Ilara, it's not the time." "Introduce me," she repeated, louder now, her voice cutting the silence like a sharpened blade. The entire room was listening. Reporters were approaching. He tried to smile, the practiced corporate smile of a man used to controlling the narrative. But the smile came out twisted, transparent. "Ilara Beaumont," he said, his voice strained. "My wife." The word was a confession ripped out under duress. A murmur swept through the ballroom. "Wife?" I thought. "Then who is she?" Alexis took a step back, her proximity to Ilara seemingly burning her perfect skin, and Ilara smiled. Not a happy smile, but the smile of someone who had waited 6 months for this moment. "Wife," she repeated, savoring the word. "Legal, because I was beginning to think you had forgotten." She looked at a journalist she had alerted, Juliet Chan, across the room. Juliet gave a slight nod. This was the headline. Marcus tried to grab Ilara's arm, but she pulled away as if burned. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "You lost that right when you decided I wasn't enough, when you needed a more polished, more convenient version of me." She looked at Alexis, now openly weeping. "Well, I hope she was worth it, darling," Ilara said, not with anger, but with something close to pity. "Because I'm not coming back." Then Ilara turned to the 300 guests, to the cameras, to the elite who had always treated her as invisible. "My name is Ilara Moreau," she announced. "I am a designer, a creator, and as of tomorrow morning, my attorney will file for divorce. And unlike my husband, I don't need to lie about who I am to be respected. I am who I always was. Authentic, honest, and infinitely more valuable than any of you realized." She walked toward the exit. The crowd parted for her. People who had ignored her before now watched her with something akin to reverence. As she passed Christophe, the doorman, he bowed deeply. "Madame," he said, and there was pride in his voice. Ilara stepped out onto Fifth Avenue. The doors closed behind her, muffling the chaos inside. She breathed deeply, filling her lungs with the cold night air. And then she laughed. A genuine, liberating laugh. She had done it. Final conclusion. The unstoppable renaissance. The next day was a media frenzy. Ilara's story went global. She was hailed as a feminist icon, a strategist who turned humiliation into art. She took control of the narrative, giving an exclusive cover story to Elle magazine entitled, "The Real Mrs. Thorne: How One Woman Stitched Her Way to Freedom." The article, which presented Ilara as a brilliant strategist, was a devastating expose on Marcus's deceit. Ilara's studio was immediately flooded with orders from women across the world who wanted a dress signed by Ilara Moreau, not just for the technique, but for what she now represented, a refusal to be erased. She eventually sold her stake in Marcus's company, taking a substantial but fair settlement. She didn't want his money, just her freedom. Marcus Thorne's life collapsed spectacularly. Investors questioned his integrity. Stock prices plummeted. Alexis, seeing the ship sink, publicly ended the relationship in a magazine interview, painting herself as another victim of Marcus's manipulation. The most important part of Ilara's journey was her Renaissance collection, which she was invited to showcase at New York Fashion Week 6 months later. The show was a powerful narrative of her healing, designs that moved from heavy, dark fabrics to light, structured, vibrant forms. The final gown was an updated, even more powerful version of the dress she wore to the gala. When it appeared, the audience, including many women who saw their own struggles in her journey, rose to their feet in a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Ilara didn't defeat Marcus. He became irrelevant to her story. She had defeated her own fear. 3 years later, Ilara Moreau's brand was international, with boutiques in Milan and plans for Tokyo. She partnered with an organization to teach sewing and entrepreneurship to women escaping domestic abuse. Her story was no longer about betrayal. It was about building a life so authentic it couldn't be broken. She occasionally received emails from Marcus. "I was wrong. I think about what I lost every night. Can you forgive me?" Ilara would look at the message for a long moment. She didn't feel anger or sadness, just a profound sense of indifference. He no longer mattered. She simply deleted the email and blocked the sender. The most important love story Ilara ever wrote was the one she created with herself. She finally understood that chosen solitude is infinitely better than toxic company. She was whole, complete, and free. This powerful story is a testament to resilience. If Ilara's journey inspired you, please share the video and comment below, letting us know what the Renaissance dress symbolized for you. Chapter 4. The Architect and the Authentic. Before we dive into Ilara's next chapter, let us know, do you think Ilara should focus purely on building her empire, or should she allow a new love into her life? Comment. Your advice below. 2 years after the spectacular Renaissance show, Ilara Moreau was no longer just a designer. She was a movement. Her business, now operating out of a sprawling, beautifully converted warehouse in Soho, was a testament to ethical luxury. Her team had grown to 40 dedicated people, and her collections were lauded for their fierce femininity and moral integrity. Ilara's personal life, however, remained a carefully guarded sanctuary. Dates were rare, and serious commitment was non-existent. The lesson she learned from Marcus wasn't that men were untrustworthy, but that her self-worth could never again be tied to external validation. A standard few could meet. One crisp spring morning, Ilara's assistant Margot burst into her private design room with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Ilara, you won't believe the offer that just came through. It's colossal. It's the Metropolitan Tower project." The Metropolitan Tower was the most ambitious new skyscraper project in Manhattan, a mixed-use behemoth redefining the city's skyline. It was being developed by the infamous Ares Group, known for its brutal efficiency and uncompromising modern aesthetics. "They want a private consultation, Ilara," Margot continued, her voice hushed. "They are commissioning an entire luxury floor, residential and retail, and they want Ilara Moreau to design all the textiles, staff uniforms, and even the interior aesthetic themes for the lobby. It's a $10 million contract." Ilara's jaw tightened. "The Ares Group? Isn't that Julian Vance's company?" Julian Vance. The name belonged to the most successful, most enigmatic real estate developer of his generation. His buildings were architectural marvels, but his reputation was cold, demanding, and legendarily ruthless in business. A younger, sharper version of Marcus Thorne, operating on a global scale. "Yes, and he specifically requested you," Margot confirmed, holding up the portfolio. He said your uncompromising authenticity is what his project needs to escape the banality of modern luxury. Elara stared at the portfolio. $10 million was enough to secure her business for a decade, allowing her to expand her social workshops tenfold. It was an opportunity that could elevate her brand from elite designer to a global lifestyle authority. But Julian Vance represented everything she had walked away from: unchecked ambition, towering egos, and the potential for deep moral compromise. "Set up the meeting, Margot," Elara finally said, her eyes narrowing. "But schedule it from my studio, not his office. If he wants my authenticity, he comes to my world." "What would you do?" "Take the massive contract and risk compromising your values, or stay small but stay true to your mission? Tell us your choice in the comments." The meeting took place 3 days later. Julian Vance arrived exactly on time, without an entourage, carrying only a sleek black portfolio. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and radiated a quiet, intense confidence that was more intimidating than Marcus's practiced swagger. His eyes, a piercing shade of hazel, took in the organized chaos of the Soho studio: the sewing machines, the bolts of sustainable fabric, the atmosphere of dedicated, messy creativity. "Impressive, Ms. Moreau," he stated, his voice a low baritone. "Most designers would have met me in a sterile showroom. This feels real." "It is real, Mr. Vance," Elara replied, standing her ground across the large cutting table. "It's built on honest work, not illusions." Julian smiled, a rare, almost disarming gesture. "Which is precisely why I am here. The Metropolitan Tower is meant to be a monument to permanence and truth. Your aesthetic, the Renaissance theme, is exactly that. I want you to inject your story into this building, from the thread count on the staff uniforms to the colors in the main lobby rug. No budget constraints." Elara listened carefully, resisting the lure of the massive figure he was discussing. "My work comes with principles, Mr. Vance. My suppliers are ethical. My materials are sustainable. My team works fair hours. No exceptions for a rushed timeline." "Agreed," he said instantly. "And no creative director tells you what to do. You answer only to me." He paused, then added, leaning slightly across the table, "I know your story, Elara. Not the public scandal, but the heart of it. The betrayal by Marcus Thorne. I know what you fight for, and I am willing to pay for that integrity." Elara was taken aback by his directness. "My story is not for sale, Mr. Vance. My designs are." "Fine," he countered, pushing the portfolio towards her. "Read the proposal. It's your creative voice, amplified to the city skyline. Think about the impact your ethos could have." The pitch was persuasive. The thought of weaving her story of resilience into the fabric of Manhattan was intoxicating. However, a nagging feeling persisted. After the meeting, while reviewing the architectural schematics, Elara noticed a discrepancy. One wing of the residential floor, designated for a high-end fashion boutique, was slated for a significantly accelerated completion timeline. She did some discreet digging through her legal contacts and discovered the truth. The retail space was being finalized as a flagship store for Alexis Cross's new, publicly funded fashion line. What do you think Elara should do? Expose Julian Vance's potential deceit right away? Or sign the contract and use her powerful position to block Alexis's retail space? Let me know your strategy. Julian Vance wasn't just commissioning her. He was potentially setting her up to work side by side with the woman who had helped betray her. It was a cruel twist of fate, or perhaps a deliberate power play by the ruthless developer. When Elara called Julian Vance to confront him, he didn't deny it. "Yes, Alexis Cross is taking the retail space," he confirmed calmly. "It's an excellent investment for the building's profile. You are both mature business professionals, Elara. You can handle working in the same vertical space. You knew my history, Julian. You deliberately put me in this position, Ilara challenged, her voice trembling with barely controlled anger. I gave you an opportunity, Ilara, he corrected. An opportunity to prove that your renaissance is real, that it's not based on avoiding your past, but on dominating it. Take the contract, and you control the entire aesthetic of the building, including the entrance Alexis uses every day. You win, Ilara, or walk away and confirm that your strength has limits. Ilara hung up, breathing heavily. He was testing her, just as Marcus's father had tested Julian. But this wasn't just a business test. It was a test of her peace, her dignity, and her hard-won indifference. Could she really face the woman who had helped steal her life and beat her? Not with drama, but with sheer, unassailable, authentic success. To be continued. This story is building to an explosive climax. Julian Vance has thrown down the gauntlet, and Alexis Cross is back in Ilara's life. Will Ilara accept the contract and face Alexis? Is Julian Vance a true admirer or a master manipulator? Don't miss the next chapter. Subscribe to Narratives and Memories and turn on notifications to see how Ilara dominates her past. Tuyệt vời, tôi cảm nhận được sự hồi hộp của bạn. Chúng ta sẽ tiếp tục chương cuối cùng này, nơi Ilara đối mặt với thử thách lớn nhất, biến sự trả thù thành chiến thắng chuyên nghiệp tuyệt đối, đồng thời khám phá động cơ thực sự của Julian Vance. Final chapter. Domination by design. If you're ready for Ilara to take back everything she lost, hit that like button right now and share this story. We need to know. Was Julian Vance testing Ilara for business or for something else? Let us know in the comments. Ilara sat at her large cutting table, the architectural blueprints for the Metropolitan Tower spread out before her. The $10 million contract lay next to them, unsigned. She felt the fierce internal battle raging within her, the logical designer who saw an unparalleled opportunity, battling the survivor who instinctively recoiled from the shadow of her past. Julian Vance's challenge echoed in her mind. Prove that your renaissance is real, that it's not based on avoiding your past, but on dominating it. Avoiding the contract meant accepting a limit to her strength. Accepting it meant facing Alexis Cross every day, using her hard-won dignity as her armor. Ilara picked up the pen. She signed the contract with a firm, decisive stroke, adding one small, legally binding clause in the margin. Final creative control over all textile patterns and aesthetic palettes within the designated common areas rests solely with Ilara Moreau Atelier, including any co-tenant common pathways. She was not going to merely exist in the same building as Alexis. She was going to control the atmosphere Alexis breathed. The collaboration with the Ares group began immediately. Ilara threw herself into the work, channeling her focus from personal defense into professional dominance. She became a force of nature, attending every site meeting, challenging every dull choice, and pushing for bold, meaningful design that told a story of resilience. Julian Vance watched, often in silence. He was demanding, meticulous, and rarely satisfied with anything less than perfection. But he was not condescending. He treated Ilara as an equal, a visionary whose talent deserved an unparalleled stage. One cold afternoon, Julian found Ilara alone in her studio, surrounded by swaths of velvet and linen. He bypassed the usual business talk. "You took the contract," he stated, leaning against a workbench. "I knew you would." "I took the contract because it was a sound business decision, Mr. Vance," Ilara corrected, without looking up. "Not because I needed to prove anything to you." "Of course not," he replied, a hint of amusement in his voice. "But you chose not to walk away, which means you chose to face the woman who helped steal your past. Why?" Ilara slowly set down her pins. She looked at him, her eyes steady. Because I realized the only power Alexis ever had over me was the power I gave her through avoidance. My renaissance is about making beautiful things from broken pieces. My work is my armor now. I don't need drama, Mr. Vance. I need control. And in this building I have it. Julian studied her, and his intense gaze felt less like a business appraisal and more like a profound recognition. That is the answer I hoped for, Ilara. Not for the project, but for you. He stepped closer. Marcus Thorne was a fraud because he had no foundation. He was only concerned with the performance of success. I admired your divorce because you understood the real value, authenticity. I wanted that value in my building. And Alexis Cross? Ilara challenged. Was she part of your authenticity plan? Julian's expression hardened slightly. Alexis was a purely commercial decision for the retail profile, but I will admit, I was curious to see if the woman whose dignity was stitched into a dress would let that past dictate her future. You passed the test, Ilara, with absolute grace. He reached out, his hand hovering over a piece of gold-threaded fabric. I respect your work, Ilara, and I respect your silence on the non-business aspects of your life. But I want to be honest. I did not just commission you for the Metropolitan Tower. I commissioned you because I wanted a reason to spend time in the presence of someone who rebuilt their world on truth. Ilara felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through her. Julian Vance wasn't Marcus. He was not hiding behind performance. He was direct, challenging, and, in a strange way, incredibly appealing. But she wouldn't allow herself to be swayed. Not yet. Do you believe Julian Vance is sincere, or is this another calculated power play? Share your thoughts below. The Metropolitan Tower opened 1 year later. The gala was even more exclusive and glittering than the one Ilara had crashed 3 years prior. The elite of Manhattan gathered in the breathtaking main lobby, which was Ilara's masterpiece. The walls were lined with silk panels in deep emerald and slate gray. The lighting was subtle, highlighting the textures of the rich textiles Ilara had personally sourced. But the pièce de résistance was the custom-designed, hand-knotted Persian rug, a massive, abstract landscape of deep blues, burnt golds, and scarlets. It was beautiful, but upon closer inspection, the pattern resembled an intricate, repaired fracture, a deliberate kintsugi design woven into the heart of the building. The space was a silent, powerful monument to brokenness and recovery. Alexis Cross arrived, stunning in an avant-garde gown, ready to make her grand entrance into her flagship store. But she paused in the lobby, her practiced smile faltering. She was standing directly on Ilara's kintsugi rug. She was surrounded by the colors Ilara had chosen, under the light Ilara had directed. The entire space, intended to be a stage for the Ares Group's power, was now a tribute to Ilara's pain and subsequent triumph. Alexis realized instantly. Ilara hadn't avoided the past. She had dominated the very ground Alexis stood on. When a reporter tried to interview Alexis in the lobby, she quickly cut the conversation short, realizing the background of every single photo would be Ilara's design, Ilara's story. Alexis retreated silently to her retail space, defeated not by drama, but by professional supremacy. Julian Vance found Ilara near the massive marble fountain, looking up at the towering ceiling. "You won, Ilara," he said, his voice low with respect. "You didn't make a scene. You made a statement. This building is a monument to your authenticity. It will outlast us all." "I didn't do it to win, Julian," Ilara replied, looking at him. "I did it because the design was true. The building needed an honest foundation." Julian didn't challenge her. He simply nodded and stepped back. He had given her the perfect stage, watched her command it, and now he was giving her the one thing she valued most: space and respect. He walked away, leaving her to bask in her moment of pure, unassailable victory. Ilara stayed for a while longer, watching the beautiful, fleeting chaos of the gala. She had everything: success, financial security, and a purpose that extended far beyond herself. She had rebuilt her world on truth. She felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. It was Christophe, the former St. Regis doorman, now retired and attending the Metropolitan Tower Gala as a special guest. "Madame Moreau," he said, with his usual warm respect. "The dress is magnificent, the finest I have ever seen." Elara smiled genuinely. She was wearing a simple, elegant black gown of her own design. "Thank you, Christophe." "No," he corrected, his eyes twinkling. "I mean the building, madam. It is a dress you have made for all of Manhattan to wear. It fits perfectly." Elara nodded, her eyes welling up. The building, her creation, was now her final, greatest masterpiece. It was solid, authentic, and built entirely by her own unbreakable will. She had fought for her dignity, found her purpose, and built an empire that would inspire countless women. Her story wasn't about a scandalous divorce. It was about the profound, lasting victory of choosing your truth over a comfortable lie. This is the story of Elara Moreau, the woman who proved that the most beautiful revenge is building a life so magnificent that your past becomes irrelevant. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey from betrayal to triumph. What lesson about resilience will you take away from Elara's story? If this story inspired you to choose your truth, please leave a final comment below and subscribe to Narratives and Memories. Check out the next story we have for you right here